Hey everybody, it's Henry Steele. Today's Saturday, February 3rd, 2024, and this is the live market video that I'm going to do about support and resistance on multiple time frames. We're looking at Bitcoin US dollar 1 minute chart here. This is going to be our low time frame. Then we'll look at like the 5 or 15 minute time frame. And we'll talk about support, or I'll talk about support and resistance on those right here. I'm using Bitcoin because it trades on Saturday and Sunday, so we can do a live market chart or live market video on actual with a chart that's trading live due to Bitcoins being traded all the time. Now, before we get started really quickly, I want to remind everybody that if you're looking for a video of mine that I made a long time ago and you can't find it on this channel, it's because I moved it to the new channel, Henry Steele Classics, and I'll put a link to that channel in the description of this video. If for some reason that link isn't working, all you have to do is put Henry Steele Classics in the search bar on YouTube and it'll come up and you'll be able to find it. So with that out of the way, I guess the last thing that I'll say before we get started here is that if for some reason you hear silence for a little bit, it's because I've muted the microphone so I can clear my throat or cough or something like that, or make some other noise that I know that you're not going to want to hear. So don't worry, it's just me muting the microphone. All right, so now let's go ahead and get started to support and resistance on multiple time frames. I'm using really short time frames, as in 1 minute, 5 minute, and maybe 15 minute, because this is going to be a short video. It's only going to be 10 to 15 minutes long, something like that, because this isn't a hard concept necessarily to get. There is something I haven't really talked about before that I'm going to talk about in this video that goes slightly beyond the multiple time frame concept, just the very basics of it. And I'll show you what I mean here in just a second. So if we look here at the 1 minute chart, this is the static chart. We can identify major support and major resistance on this chart, right? So the market, let's see, it made a top right here. So this is our major resistance. So let me put a line up there, turn it green so we know it came from a top and started its life as major resistance on the 1 minute chart. The market then comes down here and makes a line or a bottom right there. We'll put a line for minor. That's support. I'll make it red. It's minor, so I'll make it thinner. We then make a lower top right there. So we can actually, in this case, create a zone of resistance right there. The market didn't quite make it up to this price level right there. Obviously, it came back down. But if you look here, see how there's a consolidation, a little sideways movement right there? If we had put a minor price level right there of support, the market obviously broke below that, but that's what it's come back up to. And now it's moving down from there again. We get another little top right here, and we could expand this theoretically right here so that our major resistance level or zone is bigger, but we could also do it again right here. And eventually, if we just keep doing that, our zone of support, or in this case resistance, is going to grow to a point where it's not realistically a zone anymore on this static 1 minute time frame. So really, this is where we would keep it right here. This is our significant major resistance level up here. And we would just put minors down here. Now, as you can see, we could put a lot of different minor price levels all over. We could create a lot of support and resistance levels, in other words. Next week's videos are going to be concerning how to deal with the clutter of so many support and resistance levels. So that's not what we're going to talk about in this video. And in fact, I'm not talking about what to do when we get to support and resistance in this video. The purpose of this video is really just to identify support and resistance on multiple time frames. So we have this major resistance area here. We have minor support. We've created the zone with the second top right here. We have another minor support right here. So let's change that so it's appropriate. And then we move above and then we break below. And if you look, you see how this really we could make another little level right here because we have lows right here and then lows right here. Well, that's where the market came up to, this level right here. This was support, the market broke down, and now it's resistance right there. Then the market just comes crashing down like that. Sorry about that, had to sneeze. Okay, so we move way down here, and then this is very much major support. So let's make it thicker right there. And then we see that we got a slightly lower bottom right there. So we could actually create, in this case, very small support zone. It's not much more than an actual just singular price level at this point. But there's a bit of a zone right there. So several things to understand and notice is that you can't make your price zone too big because then it becomes unrealistic. And it's really, you should be identifying that as minor support or resistance levels like I showed up here. That's number one. And number two is you can actually, let me delete all these to show you number two right here. This is a good example right here. We have a bottom. This is definitely major support. The market moves up strongly and stops right here. And this right here at this point becomes a major resistance. So let me make that green right there. And that makes sense because we have support right here, minor support right here, right? So we get resistance right there. But then the market doesn't, it just kind of moves sideways a little bit and then breaks right through to a new top. So what do we do with this? In the moment, this was definitely major resistance. Or was it? The answer to that is it wasn't really major resistance because what we had here was support. We had support right here, and this is minor support. And then we had the slightly lower bottom right here. There we go. Slightly lower bottom right here. So we had a zone of support, and after the market broke through, it turns into resistance. So this minor zone right here from these little lows is what the market's reacting to off of here. So this move right here, this doesn't create a major resistance level. We're reacting off this minor level right here. We then break above without really much of a consolidation, and then this becomes our major resistance level right up there. Make it green and thick. There we go. So that's our major resistance level. The market was clearly in an uptrend this whole time. We get a bit of a consolidation here, clearly more than this, but it's not very much of a strong consolidation. Essentially, what really happened is the market broke above this level right here slightly, and it's consolidating down back into it. It's also clearly still an uptrend, and then the market strongly breaks above it. So what happens? Even though this used to be major resistance right here, we're moving our major resistance up to here and now calling this minor resistance. So this was a major level at the moment as the market was moving down. We're like, oh, there's our major level, but then it doesn't come down very far. And it doesn't take a whole long time, and then it breaks above. Remember, this is the 1 minute chart, so this is like 10 minutes maybe. So this right here, we no longer consider that major resistance. This becomes our major resistance. And we see that the market comes down and makes a slightly lower top, so we create a zone of, there we go, a zone of major resistance. Market's coming down again, and we see that it obeys this. We have this previous major that we downgraded to minor resistance has now become support, which is very, very common, obviously. And then we come back up, and the market obeys this level, but exceeds it ever so slightly. And that's one thing that you're going to discover is in markets that tend to like to obey support and resistance more than they don't, and Bitcoin is one of those, that when you get to a price zone, of a major support or resistance price zone, that the market will very frequently either stop inside of it or slightly exceed it before it obeys it, in quotes, and then goes the other direction. So now we have a slightly larger resistance zone right here. Then the market comes down, makes the top right here, and then comes down. And we could arguably move this down like this, because this is about as big as we would want a zone right there. If it were any lower than that, then I really wouldn't want to actually mark it as a major support or resistance zone. We would consider it independent levels. Like this one right here, this is an independent level right here. This is a minor top, a minor resistance level right here. In the future, as the market breaks above here on this 1 minute chart, this stays a major support or resistance level, or zone in this case, because the market's traded away from it, below it for a significant period of time of the price action that's actually on the chart right here. So when it breaks above it and creates this high, we get a brand new major resistance level on the 1 minute chart, right? And then we see that this zone right here is obeyed right here. It's obeyed again right here. And then it's eventually broken out of. So hopefully you can see why in this case, if we're just looking at this and haven't identified this, we might initially think that this is our major resistance. But when we realize that this is actually a minor support area from before, we go, okay, it's just it's obeying the minor support or resistance. And then when it breaks above it, we go, oh, okay, there's our major resistance for this big move up. But then it continues up right here and we adjust it. So as time goes on, we're going to want to adjust what we consider major and minor support or resistance levels. So that's one thing you need to keep in mind. You don't want to that's one thing that happens a lot with people, is they get their heads locked into something. They put a line on the chart and say, okay, that's major. And then they don't change. They won't let themselves change what's going on and re-identify something to the correct thing at the moment. So one thing you need to learn to do is identify major and minor support and resistance, but be willing to reclassify a previously major support or resistance to a minor support or resistance when the market tells you. And it's telling you because it's moving up in a strong way or moving down in a strong way. And you can tell it's clearly still the uptrend. Now right here, it's now a big consolidation, sideways movement. So it's no longer a strong uptrend. So this definitely stays on the 1 minute time frame. It stays resistance, major resistance zone. And then we create another one with this higher top over here. So this is on the 1 minute chart. If we move to the 15-minute chart, for instance, we're going to see, well, it's going to get really messy. And we're like, what the heck's going on here? So let's zoom in here to what we were looking at. This was our major bottom right here, support level, and that really hasn't changed. That's still a major. But this one right here, well, that doesn't really belong. These right here are definitely not going to be there. This one right here is definitely not. And then up here, we have a different area right up here. So on the 15-minute chart, we have the bottom here, which is major support. And then we have on the 15-minute chart, major resistance doesn't show up until right here. So that's our first major resistance level right there that we could put on this chart. And then we get a consolidation. Market moves sideways, and then we get a slight pop to the top where it goes a little bit higher. So we create this zone right here. It's a smaller zone, but we could move it over here like this and still consider it a resistance, the major resistance zone. And of course, on this chart right here, we come down, we're consolidating below it, and then we break above it. So on this chart, what's going on? On the 15-minute chart, even though on the 1-minute chart we considered this major support and resistance, or major resistance at first, and left it major resistance on the 1-minute chart, on the 15-minute chart, the market moves up. We consider it major resistance. It then consolidates and breaks above it. This is clearly an uptrend. So this is no longer major resistance on this 15-minute chart. This is our new resistance level, major. And then this just gets, well, it's downgraded to minor on the 15-minute chart, right? Now here's the thing. If we're looking at a 15-minute chart to put lines on here to help us trade on a 1-minute chart, for instance, maybe we're really into scalping, then, well, I'm just going to go ahead and wait until next week to talk about this, because this is how we start to deal with too many support and resistance levels, is with multiple time frames. So anyway, the video is already like 16, 17 minutes long, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here really quickly. But the main points to get out of this video are, number one, you really need to be flexible enough to rename support and resistance levels, or re-identify them, I guess I should say. Because at one point in time, they can be considered a major top, or major support, or major resistance. But as time marches on, you might have to reclassify them, and that's okay. Another thing to keep in mind is that while you might not reclassify something on a smaller time frame, like on the 1-minute chart, we did not reclassify this. We kept it major resistance. But on the 15-minute chart, well, it does get reclassified. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And the other thing is that, let's zoom out there a little bit. If you really just drew all the support and resistance lines that you could, you would probably clutter your chart to the point where it would almost be useless to you. So we really need to pay attention to next week's videos to learn how to deal with overpopulation of support and resistance. Now, one last thing that I'll talk about is you're going to find markets that do very good at obeying, in quotes, support and resistance levels. Bitcoin's one of those markets where you get a lot of respect for support and resistance lines that you put in there. There's going to be other markets where it just kind of, support and resistance doesn't mean as much, so to speak, to those markets. So when you're identifying markets that you want to trade, if you wind up being a support and resistance trader, you're going to have to be honest with yourself and really just stick to the markets that are really good at the obeying the support and resistance levels. So with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and end the video here. I already told you what next week's videos are going to be about, so I will talk to you next week.